and welcome everyone that we have online with us today for another installment in the Forage Dairyman webinar series. This is Steve Larson with the Forage Dairyman magazine staff, and we welcome you. Glad to have you with us today, and we're looking forward to our presentation this month from Mike Hutjens, our co-host himself, along with Jim Baltz, his sidekick down there, who does the technical things, and a guest person there, Eric Reed. Mike, you can talk more about Eric a little bit, but before I turn it over to you, I want to say that today's webinar is brought to us by Biotal of Lillemand Animal Nutrition, and we're going to be talking about playing the crop year cards we've been dealt, and that is a deck with a great deal of variety in it, Mike, so you must have lots to talk about, and we'll let you get started.
Well, Steve, very good, and we are excited to have our webinar here in July, being hosted by Biotal. We thank them very much for their support. Without them, we couldn't do much. And Eric Reed, a young man who got a degree here at Illinois, is on his way to up to ADSA to Indianapolis and is on campus here. So you may hear his voice chime in from time to time when he is so motivated as far as that goes. Some of you in the Northeast would recognize Eric from Old Troy Mill. Is that right, Eric?
Old Mill Troy.
Oh. Okay.
Same thing.
Same word, but different order. A lot of that going on. And so feel free to jump in. So let's go ahead and rock and roll here, and we'll be off and running. Certainly our theme this one is looking at avoiding the forage cliff. And the reason we're doing that is for a number of reasons. And Mike Rankin gave just a wonderful introductory slide on this about 3 weeks ago up in Wisconsin. He called it the perfect forage storm. So, Mike, thank you much for that. He said, here's what's happened. High commodity prices in 2011 to 13 has really got people planting corn and corn and soybeans. There's more money perceived to be made there. So acreages is coming out, especially in some of the center pivot areas in the Midwest areas here, and therefore certainly that is a factor. And then of course people like Larry Chase talk about feeding more forages to cows. So that's kind of a new theme as well. Of course, we realized back in 2011 we had a very severe drought in the Southwest. In fact, Eric, a lot of our hay and forages in the Midwest moved to the Southwest, including Illinois feeds moved that direction. There's a big pull on that. Then, of course, we're all aware of last year. Of course, we had a couple of webinars on the drought put on and being archived, and Steve reported that we've had a number of people visiting those archives, but that's been a factor there. And then, of course, the alfalfa kill. And Steve, I think you said how many counties have been declared disaster areas up there related partially to this?
22 counties, Mike.
22
in central
counties
and northeast Wisconsin.
So certainly we've got this significant alfalfa kill, and then we got a very cool, wet spring. And some of you in the West Coast are saying, what do you mean cool, wet? They're burning up at a triple-digit temperature. So let's go through and say our theme is, what kind of a hand do you have right now? And of course, Jim Baltz, being his ever a talented person, notice he did some interesting drawings. We will move on. Let's take a look at our cards. And maybe some of you have these cards on your table or in your hand or on your farm right now. Winter kill, according to the Wisconsin colleagues, about 1 million acres of Wisconsin is severe winter kill, primarily in the northeastern part of the state of Wisconsin. Not only that, but even Minnesota. I know Jim Sulfur has indicated some significant winter kill, and we see information coming out of Minnesota, South Dakota, and Iowa. So that's a lot of winter kill. The other thing that just popped up on our desk, Steve, was that appears 1 to 2 million acres will not be planted this year. A number of those acres are insured, and therefore rather than plant this late, they're just not going to plant anything in there. And then of course in that same article, 700,000 acres went out of corn, went to soybeans, and of course that certainly takes that out of the forage crop window as well. And they're predicting, and Eric, I'm not sure they're right, 155 bushel corn. We have a Bowser crop, as you'll see, if it's not been flooded out. So certainly that is one of the cards we may have. A second one is the drought. And we're very blessed right now here in Illinois, but certainly if you'll see the map here in just a second that Jim Baltz found out, there are some very severe areas as far as that occurs, and of course some carryover as well. In fact, Jim found this map. Here's July 2nd, 2013, and you can see once you get west of Iowa and Missouri, it gets pretty scary. And there's some pretty, and I was in New Mexico teaching here just a couple weeks ago, and they're really in trouble. Their big center pivots have a hard time just catching up, much less getting the crop to go at this point. And even the folks up in Oregon and corners of Washington are seeing some pretty dry conditions as well. So certainly that is going to be a challenge as well. Here comes another ace at us, and that is forage inventory. Eric, we've heard a lot of comments that people pretty much used up all their inventory. In other words, guys that had 6 months of corn silage on the farm were pleased to have it last year, because without that they would have never made it through. So very little carryover of corn silage, certainly here in the Midwest, and limited amounts of first cutting. It rained so much here in the Midwest that our first cutting was delayed to 2, 3, 4 weeks, which means that's going to be another issue at this, and that's another ace popping up, and that's forage quality. 2 issues here: some late planted corn that's probably not going to fill properly. That's going to be a factor on forage quality. And instead of having starch, we're going to have fiber and grass. And then, of course, that late cut alfalfa could be a real challenge as well as we go through that. And of course, we see this here in Illinois, and I think Wisconsin has some of this as well. I think some of you in the New England areas, I watched the map over the weekend and looked at all those storms. And Eric, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've been pretty wet.
So really a lot of wet areas up there, and we got what we call big holes, and they're so wet that they can't even get in them yet. Usually those holes get filled in with soybeans or something like that, and right now, all that's in there right now here in Illinois is ducks. Our ducks, I think they're back in Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, so certainly that's going to be a factor as well. And so this is kind of a table that Jim pulled together, and kind of tells a story. You can see you folks on the West Coast burnt up. You can see down to 20%, 20 inches short of rain. Some of those areas, you come here into Illinois, you can see we're pretty blue. We're 8 to 12 inches above normal. There are some spots in Wisconsin, and Steve, those might be disasters there. You can see they got the purple or violet. We're talking 16 to 20 inches of extra rain, and I got a feeling if we updated this map over the weekend that it'd be a little bluer on the New England area up as well. So certainly an interesting situation occurring here, and of course, as dairy producers, away we go. I'm not sure, Eric, maybe you can jump in kinds of area you work with. Fuzzy cottonseed, we're seeing some pretty high prices on fuzzy cottonseed, and cottonseed's gone up primarily because some of the drought areas that grow cottonseed are in the drought areas, and of course they were late planting it, and they're making some moves as well. So a nice forage extender in some areas, spot markets to buy this stuff. So it's right up there. So here we go. Here's our chance to vote. Eric, I'm sorry you can't vote here, but you can watch the vote. Here's your chance. What is your major concern right now in your area? And we got nearly 60 people online. We're pleased with that number. And Eric, we're going to make you vote here. There are 4 to 5 choices. Major concern: loss of alfalfa, winter kill. May not be a factor for some of us. Other areas: high price of hay, late planting of crops, especially corn, the quality of forages in 2013 and 14, and the price of byproduct feed. So the polls are now open. Jim, are the polls open? And so far,
people are voting fast today.
Okay.
Jim, in our area,
can you see the vote? Oh, okay, there it is.
We could probably anticipate what local concern might be, but we'll see what the voting says across the...
Eric, have you decided yet?
I can't vote for all of those.
Oh, you can vote. No, you can't vote for all of them. Only one. None of that easy voting.
It's a Chicago strategy there.
Just hedge my bets against all of them, huh?
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to close the vote. Jim's going to close the vote, and he's going to blow it up so we can see it. The loss of alfalfa, 9%, probably a lot of those coming from our people maybe in the Midwest. 6% said hay, 24% said late planted corn. Interesting, 40% basically said quality of forages, and another 21% price of byproduct feeds. Eric, did you vote?
Well, I was kind of thinking maybe quantity of forages. I think a lot of people are going to be running out, and that's so I'm going to vote for F, quantity of forages.
Oh boy, another independent from the New England states just voted. Well, certainly I find that interesting. I was curious. I'm not sure. So here's my cards. I've got 4 aces and a queen. I'm not sure if I could beat everybody out there or not, but certainly that's another way to look at that. Well, let's talk about that. Let's go right to a lot of this information comes from Mike Rankin and the group out of Wisconsin, Forage Alternatives. It's July. What are we going to do in July? Believe it or not, plant corn silage. You're going to shake your head now. If you're in northern Minnesota, you may kind of say, well, you got to be kidding me. But plant corn silage, we're going to go for biomass. That basically means you're going to get the most tonnage of dry matter. You'll see that number pop up in a later. You're probably not going to have any starch, so be well aware it is not going to be typical corn silage. But that's probably the number one choice. We could have voted on that. Those of you that have sorghum sudan grass, hopefully you've got that planted now. Ideally, that should be BMR, brown midrib. I think you're going to have higher quality there. But again, this crop really loves hot weather and moisture, so it'll be just in love and what's going on here in Illinois at this point. And what a wonderful place to put manure. It loves nitrogen, so you can put it on, and it just loves nitrogen. Sorghums, you probably have to have those sorghums planted into the sorghum silage. We had interest in some areas that had drought last year because they're concerned if we're going to get any rain here. A little bit late to plant ryegrass. That should have been in the ground about 3 weeks ago if you're going to do that. And of course, the old standby is buying standing forage. And again, our figures, both Mike Rankin and Dave Fisher says about $30 a ton is what it costs to harvest haylage or hay. So then you can back into a price if you want to go that direction. And then most of them are also putting on what we call a risk factor, $10 or $15 a ton, because once you buy the standing hay, then if it's getting rained on, you've just bought it as far as that goes. Now, it's going to be August in about another 3 weeks. Now what are you going to do? Well, notice we can still plant corn in August. I probably see southern Illinois doing that. I'm not sure I do that in Vermont or upstate New York, but certainly you could still plant corn, especially in those areas that have late frost and will have moisture to push it along. You can do some late seeding of alfalfa. That's the good news. The bad news is not going to give you much quantity at this point. We're not looking at quantity. We're just trying to reestablish that alfalfa for next year, hopefully. And it looks like the new seeding came through better than the old stands, according to the folks up in Wisconsin. We can start looking at annual, what we call an annual or a spring cereal grain. We're looking primarily at oats. At this point, you could plant that in mid-August. There are different kinds of oats. You can go back to a webinar we had a year ago, and you can see that Wisconsin data for those who'd like to look at the actual data. And again, you can look at buying standing forages if it's out there, and of course, you can buy straw, because in most cases, the straw is going to be in. Now, September, we will not be back on until October, so a lot of this can't be done in October. September, you can still plant some of those winter cereal grains. So we're looking at like winter wheat, winter triticale. Winter triticale is very popular here in Illinois. That's not going to give you any feed right now. It might give you a little pasture situation if you're down in Oklahoma and some areas like that. This is pretty common with some of the beef people. But then next spring, you'll have an early forage crop coming off. Southern Illinois, we could still put in some cereal grain, like annual oats or annual barley, something like that. We can harvest some corn stalks. According to the Iowa State people, there is a normal high moisture corn harvest system. There is 5 tons of corn silage sitting out there. That's a lot of mass. That's more than snowballs that you're going to get in December, but that's another alternative. They say you can take a third of it without affecting erosion and fertility, organic matter, and nutrients coming from the corn stalk. So again, that might be an opportunity. And again, the 2 standbys that we mentioned a bit earlier, buying and selling forages. So you might ask, well, what can I get from these? Again, this comes from Mike Rankin's group. And you can see that the spring cereal grains, which are now probably going to be harvested or the window is gone. At least in Illinois, what I see, our cereal grains are turning in color. That may not be true in upstate New York or upstate Minnesota or Wisconsin or in Idaho, but boot stage, 1 or 2 tons of high quality forage. This is milk cow feed, folks. 1 or 2 tons dry matter per acre. If you go to the dough stage, which is 10 or 12 days later. Boot stage, as I understand, basically the plant seed head is just coming out of the whirl. In other words, it still hasn't headed out, but it's very, very close to emerging. The dough stage means that the head is out, and if you squeeze the kernel, it'll have kind of a doughy consistency. If it's milk, they call that the milk stage. That would be intermediate between these two. So you can see you can double the tonnage, but boy, the fiber numbers go up because the plant is simply saying we're going to protect the plant. That late plant corn silage, they're estimating 3 to 4 tons of dry matter, but that's going to be grass driven. If that goes up to 5 or 6 tons, then you're going to have some starch in there, so you'd have some ear formation in there. Your sorghum sudan grass is 1 or 2 tons per cutting. If we get moisture, you're going to cut at less than 30 inches. You can cut about every 24 to 30 days there. Your fall cereal grains, according to the Wisconsin data, 1 or 2 tons. That's at the fall oats, fall barley, and factors like that. So again, not exactly breaking yields, but certainly something to consider. Well, let's look at some of our colleagues that voted that 9% number, Steve. What about alfalfa? It's not going to be there, or it's going to be expensive. Wouldn't you love to have a whole barn full of what we see at the Queen of Hearts here? So here we get the chance to vote again. So Eric, you're going to have to vote here. Polls are now open, so go ahead and start voting. Steve, we'll let you talk about the vote.
Well, it looks like here again only one, and people are voting pretty rapidly here. And with the dry weather out west that you talked about, Mike, you would imagine that where some of our hay comes from, that might be in short supply out there. So we'll see what people say as the vote develops. Let's see, looks like we've got about half of the people that voted now. And we will
Boy, I
see
tell you,
the
these
results
Democrats are
here.
really slow going here.
Yeah.
It's interesting. D&E is, Steve, a little different angle, and that is looking at it per point of RFQ, relative forage quality.
Yeah.
Well, notice I misspelled that. Sorry about that. Should be our relative quality, relative forage quality index. So RFQ is correct.
Okay.
Second time is obviously Jim Boltz's fault.
Okay. Now we've got almost 60% voted. So
Let's wrap her up and
see what survey says.
Eric, what'd you vote?
I think it's going to be in between 300 and 400.
Wow,
I think,
so he must be a Republican. He's going with the majority. I can see
Yeah.
that. Interesting. That's a big number now. You'll see here in a bit later. My computer doesn't like that number at all. Doesn't like that number at all at this point. And you can see 11% has went over $400 a ton. It's pretty amazing how much alfalfa is going to China. That's been another big question from the New Mexico dairymen, saying now we got to compete with the Chinese because they're taking all our alfalfa and putting containers and taking it over there as well. I would vote probably for $1.60 per point of relative feed value. We move on. So what's going to happen with that green bale disappearing? Be well aware that your protein dynamics really change. So some of you that are used to feeding 15 pounds of baled hay dry matter or alfalfa dry matter, you're really changing protein dynamics. So keep an eye on that. Another neat thing about that is the buffering capacity. Alfalfa clearly has been established because of its mineral composition, has a more natural buffering capability. So you may have to be looking more at buffers coming into your feeding programs if you go to alternate forage sources there. Be well aware you're going to have higher lignins, especially some of that first and second crop that's been washed on and rained on as far as that goes, delayed in harvest at this point, and certainly that's going to be a factor. So I think alfalfa is going to be kind of the Queen of Hearts is kind of going to be a wild card here, what may be happening out here. Eric, these are my numbers that we worked with, RFQ. Relative forage quality indexes, and we're saying if it's over 150, high producing cows, low producing cows, slightly lower number, dry cows even lower at this point, older heifers, that's probably my garbage can. I shouldn't say that, but basically they can tolerate some of the lower quality feeds. You can see my number. I'm guessing 1 point RFQ $1.60. So if you have an RFQ of 170 times 160, there's your 276, close to $300 a ton number sitting there. We've had several calls here in Illinois because farmers are buying hay now and they're trying to get an idea where that number should be, and that 160 was very common of the calls that we had come in here. We have a very large dairyman in Illinois. He locked her all in at 310, and he's a shrewd buyer, and he thought 310 was a real buy. So pretty much a wild card, but it simply says higher quality feeds are going to have worth more. You saw this data earlier. We just thought it fit very nicely. It simply says that if you feed quality forages, this is the Michigan State data, it shows that if we feed for every 1 change in NDFD, which is digestibility, so for 1 point increase in forage digestibility, expect 1/4 pound more dry matter, which equates to almost 1/2 pound of milk. That's a feed efficiency at 1.8 if you want to look at it that direction. So certainly no question we need to feed quality forages if you're going to try to hold that milk production in this herd. This is some data from Pat Huffman's lab published about a year or so ago, so this is older data. I simply show NDFD numbers for some of you. Now, this is 48 hours. If you're going to go to 30 hours, which is what I like to have, then you can subtract about 5 to 7 units off of that average number. So it says corn silage, 30-hour. If you're in that high 50 range, you got pretty good corn silage NDF digestibility. Obviously, if it's BMR, then you're going to be sitting way over there in that 70-plus range. But the only reason I put this up is these are typical numbers for some of you that are going to be buying or raising or harvesting forages to give you a benchmark. But look at the range, Eric. Just eye-opening, just huge. Some of these grasses and legumes are straw-like to be very honest, and some of them can be extremely high quality. So it gives you a little benchmarking where you can kind of get your feeds tested and say, well, how do I measure up here? The other thing that's coming up to play in that is, well, I'm going to take that hay out of the ration. What about this effective NDF? And to me, this visualizes pretty nicely. Here is my fruit jar, and I put a handful of TMR in there, and here's your forage raft or your rumen mat. That's going to cause that cud chewing to occur here, and this stuff on the bottom is going to flush out of the rumen, and hopefully that's starches and soya meal, because that's high quality feed. I don't need to have too much alfalfa down here, because if it does, which means I over process it, it's going to get flushed out of the rumen, and as a result have very low digestibility. Us old guys call that the Metamucil effect, but we will move on from that point. What about measuring effective fiber? A nice number, 5 pounds of particles off the top of the Penn State box. That would be over 3/4 of an inch. Anything over 2 inches, Lou Armentano from Wisconsin would argue that is sortable. So we don't want to have this long material in there, and yet we have to have certainly something at least at 0.75 or higher. If you have 10% in your top box and you got 50 pounds of dry matter, as we would say, bingo, there it is. There's your 5 pounds. There are some other ones to take a look at in terms of effective fiber. And of course, Steve, you and I were talking a bit earlier, some of these rumination collars might be kind of interesting to see what they pick up on as farmers go from different quality forages. And my guess is we'll see a lot more cud chewing if we have some of that low quality first crop, or farmers start putting corn stalks or straw into the diet. So certainly physically effective fiber is a big concern when we lost alfalfa, and we, in fact, working with the herd in New Mexico, they want to go down to 3 pounds, and they were feeding 15. Let me tell you, you'll have to do some magic with your computer, and we really struggled. Once we get down below 7 pounds to make that ration look good based on the ingredients that they had out there on their farm. This comes from Randy Shaver. This is a wake-up call. We're going to chop corn silage before our next webinar. And what Randy presented here in May looks at some studies looking at the kernel processing score. This is a screening device available through several of the labs in Wisconsin. And I think even Cumberland labs also make that available. In fact, they have to, because you can see they're identified up here. But look, these are all the different samples, different years, but look down here. Poor quality kernel processing. Look at this one over here, Cumberland Valley. Nearly half of it improperly processed. Well done. You can see in the teens. So wake-up call. Dairy farmers, consultants, nutritionists, veterinarians, really be sure we have these processors set up so that the corn silage behaves like a forage. This is a powerful set of data. Randy, thanks for sharing. And then he said, what does that mean to a dairy farmer? And the answer, again, from Dr. Shaver, and he did some extrapolation using their data, about 2 pounds of milk when done wrong, you lose, and 2 pounds more milk when you do it right. 4 pounds of milk laying on the table, depending on where you were on that last chart. Wow, what a wake-up call. And of course, Eric, now the big word is, what should we look like? These are the Illinois guidelines. They are a bit more aggressive than Penn State, and we have our ranges a little tighter than Penn State. So it simply says if you're chopping corn silage with a 3/4 inch theoretical length of process, you should be somewhere around 10-12% in the top box, over 50% in the middle box, and less than 35% in the bottom 2 boxes if you got the 2 or 3 or 4 box system. I was told somebody tried to buy a box last week, and NASCO is back ordered. So just a comment on that as well. So to me, when we pull these alfalfa hays out of the diet and some of the more traditional forages, then some of these TMRs might get a little spooky in the kind of numbers you're going to see up here on top. Now let's take a look at what I think is an excellent job of kernel processing. This is an Illinois sample. Notice if you take, here's a ruler, and Jim Baltz put that there. If you measure from this corner to that corner, that'll give you a theoretical length of chop, and this, by Georgia, is 3/4 inch theoretical chop. Every farm I got to, everybody chops a 3/4 inch until I take my ruler out, and then I find out we don't have it. Notice we got 13.5% in that top box. Here's the middle box. You can see almost 70% in the middle box. One of the best ones I shook out. In fact, we had one that beat this here 3 weeks ago on another farm in Illinois, but I didn't have my camera with me to grab it. You can see corn cobs are crushed pretty well. You can see a couple pieces of corn in there, and then I got about 18% on the bottom. By the way, this corn was 180 bushel corn running 37% starch. So trust me, it's all there. It's there. Maybe you can't see it, but Eric, I don't want to see it here, because if I see it here again, there's a pretty good chance my grain screens and my manure fecal starch analyses are going to see it again. And then the pheasants and the ducks and that do well, but my dairy cow will not. That then brings up this question, was very common in Wisconsin, and that is, what about the shredlage? I understand there's going to be 50 plus of these units available here in the Midwest this year. That's a shredlage. That's a different type of a processor. We talked about this already last year, this Randy Shaver information, and again we can see what happens is that it's a much different type product, and you'll see that here's just a picture again from Randy showing on the right kernel processor, on the left is your shredlage type roller out there, and of course this is pictures from last year's research. I believe they're doing more research this year, but you, Eric, hopefully you can see it. I can see it. This on the left is much coarser. You can see it's coarser, and you see less corn in it, and that's the comment that I've gotten from people that use shredders. When we were in Wisconsin last 3 weeks ago at meetings, the shredlage product just really hammers the corn kernels, really hammers it. And you can look at this and you can see some corn kernels over here, so that may be another factor. Kind of goes back to Randy's information a bit later. Now here's kind of the telling point. Again, from last year, you can see the reference at the bottom. Here sits your shredlage. You can see that we've got almost a third of it in the top box. Here's your kernel process at 6%. So what you're doing, if you add these two numbers together, and we call that the effective fiber coming off using the Penn State box, this is about 80%. This is about 73%. So this shredlage has literally moved about a half of it up to the top box. Now, that could replace straw, the corn stalks, could replace alfalfa. So certainly the shredlage, when it comes to physical fiber, could become a factor on those farms that have that alternative. And of course, the big question was, how much more can I pay for shredlage? Because these rollers are in the $35,000 range, and they take more power, according to the Michigan State people, to get the job done. Well, let's move on to our next phase. Our time, Steve, is rapidly moving on us here. Let's take a quick look at forage inventory. Certainly, we should be, the clock is now running. Our number here, and this is a normal, this is not Larry Chase's high forage diet. We're looking at about a 55% of the ration dry matter coming from forages. You should plan on about 30 pounds of forage dry matter per cow. That includes a 5 to 7% shrink, which means loss in storage, loss at feeding time, way back, which means I need about 5.5 tons of dry matter for each dairy cow. That includes the dry cow in that count at this point. Now, a number of farms will also be having replacement heifers. Our thumb rule is take 30% of this number for replacement heifers. And obviously, if the replacement heifer is 300 pounds, she eats a lot less forage than if she's at 1,200 pounds. So on average, and so it says if you're going to have a cow unit, per unit, that'd be a cow and a replacement heifer, figure about 7 tons of corn silage. And now the clock is running. So I would hope some of us dairy farmers, some of us consultants, we're actually keeping track of this number so that we know when September comes along, what am I going to do? Where am I going to be? What am I going to have to do to get that answer done? So what is your strategy going to be if you are short? So Eric, I think this is our last vote, so let's get this one right now. So he's off and running. The polls are now open. So Steve, what are our choices?
Well, you're going to buy alfalfa, grow more corn silage, depend on byproduct feeds, consider corn stalks or straw, or feed more grain. So let's see how the people are doing. We're starting to see the votes come in. pretty.
It's really interesting, Steve. All three of the questions really never had a right or wrong answer. It was just kind of interesting to see what people are thinking, and I guess it'd be neat to know where you are, because I got a feeling the answers from Wisconsin are different than the answers from, say, New Mexico or Florida. But anyway, we are. Boy, we are really slow voting. Maybe the voting's too tough. We normally get about 65, 70%, but boy, I tell you, come on, guys and gals, let's shape up here. Eric, give me a hint. What are you going to vote for?
Well, probably won't see too many corn stalks up our way. All that's going to get harvested for corn silage. We'll probably stretch it out with some sort of a hay, if we can find it. So it may not even be alfalfa. It may be some hay sticking around there. I think it's going to be tough to find. So then I think you're going to see some more byproducts and just trying to stretch everything out in general. So we'll probably see a multi-pronged approach, at least in our area, just trying to stretch things out a little bit.
Okay, only half of you 70 people are going to vote, so be that way. Be a bunch of Democrats. See if I care. Anyway, we move on. Interesting numbers here. It's Jim. Can they see the vote? Can our people can see the votes?
Pretty well scattered, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? The feeding more grain, and people are still talking. If this crop comes in as big as they're talking, that we could be under $5. We could be around $5, $5.20 bushel of corn, which opens up another whole big discussion, maybe in October at that stage of the game. So, Eric, great comments. Appreciate your look at it at this point. So here they are at this point, and. I'm sorry, I'm too much of a Dutchman. I'm not going to buy the hay at $320 or $400 a ton. I think it's just too expensive. I think it's just too expensive at this point. So certainly we've talked these through so we can just move on from here, and I'm not sure there is a right answer. I think the right answer still sits there on top for us, Eric, and that is just more corn silage, especially if some of these fields don't make it. We may have some alternatives there. That's where I'd probably be voting if I had a vote on that vote. Here are just some numbers for you to take a look at. You can argue these back and forth. We look at milk cow rations. If we're going to put straw and corn stalks in, would be my strategy, how I would bring them in. I would use lignin as a marker to see how much I'm going to be feeding. I keep my lignins below 4% because I'm concerned about the digestibility. You can see the amounts. We're gonna process both of these. Boy, you better process corn stalks. In fact, the Kepke farm, they were at our 4-state meeting. They go out and they chop their corn stalks with a field chopper the same day that they take high moisture corn in. So they actually have what you and I would call a corn silage look-alike, but no grain in it. And they actually ensile it, and it works really, really well. You want to add some water to these if you're going to try to ensile them, unless, of course, you're going to go bone dry. Dry cows, that's Dr. Drakely's work. You can feed 9 or 10 pounds of straw. He's done no work with corn stalks. We would think they could behave the same way, but there's no data on that. Pat Hoffman says that if you have a high-quality corn silage and alfalfa, then you're going to have to put some filler feed in there. And we could be looking at corn stalks and straw. In fact, there was some interesting work done looking at corn stalks and distillers grains, wet distillers and corn stalks, making a really nice ration out of those two. We talked about last year. You can go back to that webinar if you want to look at it. We showed you the data using calcium oxide or quicklime on corn stalks. You can take corn stalks and make it look like a grass hay. You can increase the TDN or the digestibility by 10 or 12 to 15%. They need to be treated when it's warm out, and it takes about 10 days according to the Illinois beef specialist. Be well aware of the dirt on the corn stalks. That's always a big concern there. And of course, you can have some mycotoxins in straw. We saw that problem 3 years ago. So just some cautions if you're going to be working off of this PowerPoint. The next one I want to talk on, and that is, there's no sense not saving everything you got in the field. So I think you just got to inoculate silages, period. The data is pretty strong from Washington State. You see about a 3% improvement in dry matter recovery, which means that you got 3% fewer acres you have to reach your goal. A 2% increase in digestibility because that crop ferments even a bit faster. If you look at $1 per ton for treatment costs, and yes, I know there are some products out there at 80 cents or some out there at $3 per ton, but if you look at $1 per ton, then the nutrient preserve, which means digestibility and dry matter, that's a 3-to-1 return on investment. Then, and that is some work out of the Kansas State group. And then if you take those nutrients you preserve, put it through a high-producing dairy cow, then the benefit-to-cost ratio is 8-to-1, because good cows, that's the only reason you hopefully feed cows, is to add value to your feedstuffs. If you're not making any money taking your valuable feeds, putting them through a cow, maybe that's better than being in Weight Watchers, but the point is you don't make much money on it at this stage of the game. The other one, and I don't have any stock in this company, but one, it just intrigues me, the oxygen barrier covering is out there right now. And so we thought we'd just put that website up there. You can find the research there. What impresses is that the way it's manufactured, it has a 3-layer effect, and it's 60 times a reduction in oxygen penetration in the wet silage. And they use something called the OTR, which is the oxygen transfer rate. And certainly if there are questions on this, Dr. Reed will be happy to answer all those questions on that formula, I'm sure.
I've seen this out there, and it seems to work pretty well. So,
yeah,
again, I have no stock in the company either, but I've been telling people about it too.
What catches my eye, you can see the top foot, 2 feet of silage. Dry matter losses have been measured to be reducing by 50%. That results in about a 2 to 5% savings in the dry matter when you look at the total mass. So if you put a good inoculant on that gives you 3%, and you use these kinds of products, there's another 3%. That's 5 or 6% more feed, and that's just amazing. And you grew it; it's standing out there, and it's just a matter of us hopefully retaining that value in the program. I've seen some people going with triple layering, which helps a little bit. Farmers that overlapped their silages and put down 2 or 3 layers, they have seen a pronounced improvement as well. I don't think you still get the oxygen penetration. And Eric, what surprised me was some data from Michigan State that there's oxygen penetration through the walls of bunker silos.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable. You say that, wait a minute, that's concrete's several inches thick. What do you mean air penetration? The answer is it penetrates that. It's just eye-opening. I'd have lost a piece of pie in that kind of bet had we went on betting on that. Well, we're going to run out of time here in another 4 or 5 minutes, and we try to stay in that 45-minute webinar point because we got a nice crowd here, and you've got places to be and things to do, making good feed decisions. Here we go. This looks repetitive, probably. This is FeedVal 2012. One of the other farm magazines had the Sesame data up there as well. I ran these back in late June, and these are my numbers. So if you don't like my numbers in the current feed prices, well, I'm sorry, that's where they're at. So you can see, and if they are in orange, Jim Baltz said they are overpriced. So you can see that FeedVal 2012 said corn at $6.70 a bushel was too expensive. You'll see where that price might be here in just a few minutes. And remember, on FeedVal 12, all these feeds interact against each other. So the winners are, believe it or not, soybean meal, corn silage, and corn stalks. You can see straw at $140 a ton is too expensive. You can see the break-evens there. So again, that gives you as users a little idea. Remember, these are Illinois prices using FeedVal 12. The good news is FeedVal 12 is free. You can run them your own way. Here comes some of the byproduct feeds that Eric referred to, Distillers grains. In fact, Distillers grains, $220 is a price I used. I can get it for $190, and then you got to get trucking on top of that. We just got a tag from a company on Distillers grains that said their oil content has been reduced to 7% instead of the normal 10 or 12%. The protein's at 23% on a tag instead of the normal 25 on a dry matter base, which would be 30. So Distillers grains is changing in the Midwest. These plants are doing neat things to it. And a wake-up call on the corn gluten feed, we just saw a news release to our Farm Bureau publication, is now their plants are going to start extracting cellulose, taking some of the corn gluten cellulose, converting it over to glucose polymers and make more ethanol. They think they can increase ethanol production by 10%. That's the good news if you're an ethanol producer. It's bad news if you're a dairy farmer wanting to buy cheap corn gluten feed. You can look at the other ones, soy hulls, nut steel, fuzzy cottonseed. You can see the break even there. That price is probably a little bit low right now. I think it's a little higher than that. Eric, do you have a price up in the New England area where it might be?
I don't know. I think we might be even a little more than that. I think you're right. Yeah. Okay. Depends. I mean, a lot of people contracted, so.
Yep. Away we go. And there's your website. So again, if again, for some of you, maybe that's the only thing you'll do from this webinar and say, okay, let's check out that crook from Illinois and let's put our feed prices in and decide exactly where our break-evens are going to be at this point. And you can see there's some other neat stuff on that website as well. Penn State, by the way, has a wonderful website. Minnesota has some nice stuff on their website on drought as factors as well. Well, let's wrap up my webinar by simply saying, you know what, these cows still are going to produce milk. And by George, let's take this milk, and I understand milk prices are going to look a little more favorable according to Bob Kropp in the future. These are our futures, so you can take a look at. These are the June 24th, my newsletter that didn't come in on the 4th of July. I would have updated them. You can see milk prices look like they're going to climb a little bit, but certainly not going to make you filthy rich here. Corn prices, Eric, I don't know, depending on where this crop goes. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? And there you can see the soybean meal prices easing up a little bit as well. So certainly this could be good news. December could be good news if corn prices, bean meal prices go down, because the byproducts tend to track with them. They tend to follow those curves pretty nicely as far as that goes. We saw this earlier. I updated this with our feed prices in Illinois in June of 2013. 13 cents per pound of dry matter. Cost me about $6.60 to feed that mythical cow. If she gives me 80 pounds versus 70 pounds of milk, you can see here very quickly again, my feed cost somewhere, and this is only the milk cow, not the dry cow, not the heifer. So some of you saying, well, Hutjens, your number is really different than those crooks in Wisconsin and Penn State. You got to figure out what are they putting into income, what are they putting into feed costs, income over feed costs. This is just the milk cow. Income over feed costs, we need every bit of this. We need every bit of this to cover all our costs as we start seeing gas prices going up a little bit more. And of course, here's that standard feed efficiency that we've talked about in some of our earlier webinars as well. Here's your take-home message. If my cow gives me 70 pounds of milk with that same ration instead of 80 pounds of milk, which is still a fairly decent feed efficiency number, look what happens to my economics. It means that's going to cost me $1 more for each 100 pounds of milk. And boy, I know dairymen who would die for 20 cents per hundredweight savings. Here, there's $1 laying on the table. So here is the new economics, the 13 cents a pound of dry matter. Remember the thumb rule, 2 pounds of milk per pound of dry matter. Milk at 20 cents a pound. That's about where we're at right now. You can see that for every pound of dry matter, even though it's costing me 13 cents, and those folks in the West Coast and up in New England, that number might be a little bit higher than that. I still got 27 cents laying on the table. That's pretty powerful. Component-wise, you can see that we are paid for components. Eric, I guess you guys are paid for components up there as well. Certainly we are paid for components, and so this chart will be updated in the August issue. In fact, the National Holstein meeting is going to be in Indianapolis this week, along with ADSA, and that's where a lot of us are heading, and that's where Eric is leaving here right after this webinar, and so am I, and we'll be driving over to Indy, but we will get these updated for the breeds at this point. So it simply says components are important. Why are they important? I went and we used, in fact, we just got the numbers in here. Jim Baltz put them in for me. June 2013. These are the new prices. Butterfat, $1.66 a pound. Protein, $3.35. We want our protein. And certainly you guys with the Greek yogurts, you really want that protein because that becomes a big factor. If my herd was giving 70 pounds of milk, which is pretty typical here in Illinois, with a 3.5 butterfat and a 2.9 true protein, if we went to the Hoard's Dairyman table and said this is exactly what they should be doing genetically, then you can see there's another 48 cents laying on the table if I can get that extra 0.2 of a point on fat and 1/10 of a point on protein. There's another 48 cents laying on the table. By George, that's a lot of money. I don't care if you're milking 40 cows or 400 cows. That's just an awful lot of money. These numbers didn't change for me. I thought I'd just put them up as we wrap up here, as we look at the hand that's being dealt to you, depending on the type of forages you have. These are our guidelines for carbohydrate status. We call this the cell wall. Here's our NDFs, my ADFs, and my lignins. And if you're feeding lots of byproduct feeds, I can squeeze this number up to 33 or 34 because that fiber is going to be more soluble and fermentable down over here. Here's my rumen fermentable carbohydrates, a little different than NFC. NFC would also add your organic acids. I like rumen fermentable carbohydrates. This is the fuel for the microbes. And starches, 22 to 26, sugars 4 to 6, and my soluble fibers 10 to 12%. Now, we worked with a software program on Saturday that they were calculating soluble fibers a lot differently than Spartan 3. These are pretty much Spartan 3 driven type numbers. So just be careful on this one down here. Your computer might calculate that a little differently, and we're looking at your pectins and some of those degradable type products as well here. Here sits the protein numbers. I throw them up primarily because of the alfalfa scenario. Mike Vandar gave a very nice, Van Amberg, I'll get it right, Van Amberg gave a talk at the Forestator, and if you're going to be fitting with alfalfa, you're going to be sitting up over here, but when you get down these heavy corn silage dyes, you're going to squeeze these lower numbers down here at this point. If you're going to be feeding lots of corn silage, be careful on this one because my alfalfas bring lots of soluble protein, so keep an eye on your soluble and rumen degradable protein here. I think any ration you're going to balance, you're going to have a model, and there's a number of companies that have metabolizable protein models out there. Just meet the needs. Be sure you meet the cow needs, and if the cows are over 75, 80 pounds of milk, then I think you better keep an eye on lysine, methionine, maybe histidine in the future here. That ratio should be 3 to 1. Sorry about that missing period. 3 to 1. In other words, three parts lysine in the metabolizable protein base, or essential amino acids, depending what your computer is calling it, to the methionine, or somewhere around 6.6% slash 2.2% of the metabolizable protein as lysine methionine. And again, this may be fine-tuned at ADSA this year, Eric, a little bit, but those are kind of the numbers we've been reading the last year or so as far as that goes. So we're done. We're out of time. We're at 45 minutes in here, and we'll see if there's going to be any questions that come up here. Here are your take-home messages. I assume you can read them. Eric, did you get them all read?
Yeah.
Okay, Eric's got them all read. If somebody from New England can get them all read, then we should be done at this point. Certainly, you can take a look at that. We do want to promote one other thing, though, before I turn the program back to Steve. So, Steve, you have the program here in about a minute. We have two new things that are happening. Number one, we have a ration balancing class, and we're going to be using Spartan 3, just so you're aware of that, primarily because we can download that. You can download that free for 120 days. That's the Michigan State program. And we've had an interest from some of our former students saying, you know, Mike, we just didn't spend enough time in ration building and ration balancing. And so this class is going to be devoted specifically only to ration formulation. And Jim Baltz and I will start taping the modules on this starting probably next week as far as that goes as well. Besides that, that's a class. That's 1 credit. It's our traditional class. It's 5 weeks in length, so it's a 1 credit class, and you all know what those charges are. Another thing, thanks to Steve Larson's leadership in Hoard's Dairyman, there's going to be a hands-on evaluation of feeding systems using the Hoard's Dairyman farm during World Dairy Expo Week. So for some of our international people, and we've had 3 or 4 people ask us to do this, they would like to be able to actually go to a farm and do a walkthrough. And so the Hoard's Dairyman has indicated on October 5th, that's a Thursday, that we could use their farm for a walkthrough. And we will have forage test information, we'll have Spartan 3 running, we'll have our Penn State boxes, we'll have our screens out there, we'll do our feed bunk management. And again, the only limitation there is 20 people. That's all we can really handle on the farm. And so there are the 2 websites. You do not have to sign up them together. In other words, you do not have to take the class to do the walkthrough. You don't have to do the walkthrough if you take the class. They are 2 totally independent items as far as that goes. With that, Steve, we'll turn the program back to you.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much. And we should mention on that lab, that's right smack dab in the middle of World Dairy Expo. For those of you who want to combine that lab with a day or 2 at the big show in Madison, that's why it's up here at that time. And it's a great show if you haven't been there. Lots to see and do. Mike, thank you so much for a great webinar today. We certainly have a diverse set of cards that we've been dealt this year as we look across the country, and you really covered a lot of the options and opportunities that we have, and we appreciate it very much, and we appreciate Biotal, their sponsorship of today's webinar as well. We thank Jim Baltz, your sidekick down there as always, for his help, and Eric Reed. It was nice to have a visitor with us today as well. Should remind those of you that are listening, especially the new ones that are with us, that you'll be receiving a survey here in a few days from us to get some feedback from about the webinar, and your responses help us plan webinars that you want and need in the future, and that they're delivered the way you want them. Also, we want to call your attention to next month's webinar, Is Robotic Milking a Good Deal? The presenter will be Larry Tranel from Iowa State. That's going to be brought to us by DeLaval VMS. And Mike, you tell me that Larry is actually in Europe now.
Yeah, that's right, Steve.
On a study trip. So
yeah, he's on a study trip.
Looking at a lot of robotic installations over there. So he'll be sharing some of those observations as well as the experiences he's had there in Iowa, and looking ahead just a bit further in new concepts in mastitis control. Pam Rug back again, very popular webinar in the past, from the University of Wisconsin, sponsored by Boehringer Ingelheim. And Mike, just one more thought here before I continue with you. Those of you that are listening, be sure to keep in mind that all of this webinar will be available online in our archives here in the next couple of days, and that all of the past webinars are available as well by going to forage.com and clicking on webinars and going to the archives. And as I mentioned to some of those who joined us earlier, we've had more than 24,000 views of our archived webinars over the past 2.5 years, so there's been a lot of interest in those. So Mike, with that, I don't know if we have any questions or if you have any further comments to make.
Well, no, I think this is a very fluid presentation. If we went dry here in Illinois, I think I'm not sure if Eric would agree, but I think we got the crop made, Jim. I think if we went dry right now, our good soils, our deep soils, I think we would have a pretty good crop at this point. Steve, I'm nervous. Your comment earlier that the corn and the lighter soils look really good right now, and of course, as long as it keeps raining, light soil. We had some of that in our farm near Green Bay, Wisconsin. Boy, I tell you, in 2 weeks it could burn up just in a in 2 shakes of a
so
lamp.
We're pretty iffy up here across, between that fact and the fact we still have some water standing. We have a lot of wet spots that may have to be dealt with in some way. So it's
the only other comment I would add, Steve, and Mike Rankin has put this out, and that is some people have don't plant insurance, and so you really want to be very careful in making that decision. If you go in and plant something right now in Illinois, that we're right in the sweet spot of that timeline, and so if you plant something in there, then you lose that coverage, and so it's kind of like if something happens and you burn a building down on a farm, are you going to try to rebuild that same building, or is it better off to start from scratch? So just be well aware. He warned those people at our meeting 3 weeks ago to be eyes wide open on that at this point. Eric, any comments?
No, just driving over from Indianapolis over here. The corn probably doesn't look as good as it normally does, but it was definitely a relief to me, somebody from the Northeast that's just got yellow corn everywhere and puddles and everything. I was getting pretty nervous, and to see that corn, maybe shoulder high, that's a reassuring fact for at least for a guy from the Northeast. So.
Certainly the futures markets are indicating that somebody thinks there's quite a bit of corn out there, and that there will be this fall. So
Emerson Knapsinger told us, and may be useful, Steve, for some of our people who have wet feet, that we've had some purple corn in Illinois and some yellowy corn in Illinois, and he said a lot of hot weather will really help those crops out quite a bit. And that he appears to be true here in Illinois. If it is yellow, it also could be nitrates. They may have leached the nitrates out, and so eyes wide open trying to make that call on the yellow corn. But the purple corn had a purple color to it. People thought it had a disease or something. He said, no, it's just wet weather and cool nights. And I tell you, we are not going to have cool nights here the next couple of days. They're talking 90-plus degrees here. But boy, if you're a corn grower, you're just smiling all the way to the bank.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder how we are generally, though, on growing degree days. We've had some warm weather up here the last few days. We're expecting more, just like you are. But the temperatures have been pretty mild through a good bit of June. So we really needed this sunshine and warmth that we've gotten here in the last week or 10 days. We just hadn't had a lot of it.
Well, Steve,
you just push things along.
Yeah, you just put the gauntlet down here. Jim Balls is feverishly typing away here, so we'll see how good he is. If he can come up with degree days here, we'll find out. So maybe he's smiling over there. I think he doesn't have anything yet, but the task is on. So if those of you want to wait for a minute or two, we might be able to see if we got degree days coming your way at this point. Anyway, you're right.
We had a nice turnout today, but I just kind of wonder if a few of our regulars aren't in Indianapolis as we speak, attending the joint animal science, dairy science meetings over there. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, it could be. This year, it's an unusual year because they're starting on Monday, and normally we start on Sunday night. So last year we actually came from the site and got away with it thanks to Jim Bolz's magic. Brought us in. So being as close as we are to Indy, we're only 2-hour drive away. Then it made much more sense from our perspective to go from here. But you're right, we may have lost some. But anyway.
Well, we always appreciate those.
Maybe it's just the speaker, Steve.
Oh, I doubt that. And Mike will be back again in October. He's our webinar presenter there. Boy, he'll be interesting. I'm sure there'll be a lot to talk about Mike, but boy, wonder how things will be.
Yeah, and I think and maybe if some of you listeners think
4 or 5 months from now.
Yeah, if it's not useful, then let me know. But I'm pretty sure, Steve, you're right. We'll kind of do again look at where we're at in October. We have a few alternatives left, but not very many at that point. This was the magic one, and we felt that the hot topic had to be looking at where our crops were and what kind of challenges we're seeing and what kind of alternatives we had. So kind of I'd say almost no-brainer. For our listeners, we had another one scheduled here on the Farm Bill, but
yeah. Mike, I see there is one question. Do you see that? On how much forage carryover would you suggest on a normal year?
Well, I'll let Eric jump in on these and Steve as well. Normally, our guys are looking for at least 4 months on the corn silage, 4 to 6 months, because the data is pretty clear. It gets better. So, in other words, if I can keep my corn silage, in other words, I don't have to feed this year's corn silage till Christmas. It's kind of a Christmas present. The starch is more available, and we get more milk out of it. That's pretty clear. So, I think most of my farms are looking at least 6 months carryover on the corn silage, and probably the similar on the alfalfa haylage. Now, the good news on the haylage is you want to use it up pretty quickly. We had a farmer who kept his on for 3 years, and guess what? He killed cows with it. So just be careful with that alfalfa that you don't keep it there. It's not like wine. It doesn't get better with age at this point. So certainly, I would think, and Eric, maybe you can comment. I just see my dairymen getting a little nervous with these weather patterns, and they just feel a lot better having 6 to 8 months on the farm. Just gives them a hedge on what's going to happen.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. I can't tell you how many calls I get in the fall saying, how do we feed green chopped corn again? And, just taking cows in and out of that is a nightmare from at least the nutritionist standpoint. And so, I've been trying to really preach 6 to 8 months. If you can get it up in the Northeast, we seem to be a little light on land. And kind of the old model was, you put an acre per cow and then you buy what else you need, anywhere you can get it. But now with the variable markets and with the commodities following, fuel and those types of things, I wouldn't want to have to buy feed. And especially now you get into some of these weather patterns where you don't know. And so I definitely would like to have, if I was farming, at least 6 months of forages put up, just knowing that it's there. Would probably let me sleep a little better at night, and from a nutritionist standpoint, that also helps in the same fashion. So yeah, I'd agree with that. Probably 6 months, but at least I'd say at least 3. At least.
I remember being in a meeting where there was a farmer panel, and they were talking about risk management, and I think most people are thinking about contracting feeds and contracting milk, doing various things like that. But one dairyman made the point. He said, my bags of silage out there, that's my risk management. That's my ace in the hole. Interesting thought.
Yeah, I've noticed that the really sharp businessmen, dairy guys, already have this year probably in the bag. Here we are sitting trying to figure out what's going on, and a lot of these guys, you mentioned your sharp dairyman in Illinois that bought his alfalfa for 310. He wanted to lock it up, so he knows his cost of production. He felt like that was where he needed to be, and so he locked it in. And I've really been kind of out preaching to people that you need to be thinking about your entire program, for this year. It should already be done, and you should be thinking about what you're doing next year to make sure that you can still be ahead of the game. So that's kind of where I've been.
Right.
Well, Steve, here's your answer. Jim, can they see that now? Jim,
Yes, I can see it. I can see it.
There's your degree days from Iowa, and you can see that anytime you go below 100, that's normal. So, Steve, you were right. Good thing
It's been cool.
And look at June.
Cool.
Look at June. Normally, you expect maybe June we'd be in good shape, but June is worse than May to June. So,
I wonder if that isn't pretty indicative of what we've had, across the upper Midwest.
yeah, I think probably East Coast too, I would guess.
Yeah, it's been pretty cool out there. We're catching up fast though. I got home this past week and the air conditioner wasn't on, and it was warm. We're catching up. We're catching up.
Thank you, Jim, for digging that out for us, and that's a great graphic and tells quite a story for us. So we need some
We
heat.
wanted to thank Steve. Thank you very much. I'll let you wrap this thing up and thank our sponsors one more time. Eric Reed, thank you very much. It adds to the program, and we go from here.
Been a pleasure having a front row seat. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to hear you, Eric. And Mike, so thanks so very much for your presentation. And again, thanks to Biotal for their sponsorship. We're signing off up here just with the reminder that our next webinar, August 12th, is Robotic Milking a Good Deal. Larry Tranel from Iowa State will be the presenter, and DeLaval VMS will be the sponsor of that webinar. So that's all for now.